What if I told you that one of Middle-earth's most unforgettable heroes wasn't a wizard, a king, or even the ring-bearer, but a stout, stubborn dwarf with a heart 10 times the size of his axe? Gimli wasn't just comic relief or a sidekick to flashier characters. He was loyalty made flesh, courage without theatrics, humor that cut through fear. In a world of elves and legends, this dwarf walked into every scene and stole it. Not by force, but by being exactly who he was. And yet most people still don't know the full story, because here's the truth. Gimli's journey is one of the most profound in all of Tolkien's lore. From rejection and rivalry to reverence and redemption, his path reshaped what it means to be heroic in Middle-earth. He broke stereotypes, mended centuries of prejudice, and became the bridge between worlds, literally and spiritually. If you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or like your voice didn't belong in the room, Gimli's story was made for you. And by the end of this journey, you'll see how a dwarf who wasn't even supposed to be part of the original quest became a symbol of unity, strength, and legacy. Ready to find out how? Let's begin. You know, when we talk about Middle-earth's legendary figures, folks tend to jump straight to Aragorn or Gandalf, but let's slow down a bit and pay attention to Gimli. Born in 2879 of the Third Age, right? In the rugged heart of the Blue Mountains, Gimli wasn't just any dwarf. He was the son of Glóin, one of the brave few in Thorin's company who dared to face Smaug. That alone gave him a pretty epic legacy to live up to. And trust me, in dwarven culture, lineage isn't some nice to have, it's everything. If your beard traces back to Durin the Deathless, people listen when you speak. Durin's folk, the clan Gimli hailed from, were practically royal blood. We're talking about the same dwarves who built and ruled Khazad-dûm before it was overrun, Moria to most. These weren't cave dwellers hammering away in obscurity. They were builders of kingdoms, shapers of stone, and keepers of lore, older than most of Middle-earth's trees. Gimli, being part of that line, carried a heavy crown. Though it didn't sit on his head, it weighed on his shoulders. And this sense of legacy, it didn't make him arrogant. It made him hungry to earn it. But lineage alone doesn't buy you greatness. It gives you a spark. What you do with that spark is what defines you. That's the thing about Gimli. He didn't ride into the story waving a family tree around. He forged his worth day by day. It's a reminder, really. Legacy can either be a throne or a trap. And he chose to build on it, not hide behind it. It's the same with any of us. A last name, a diploma, a title. It's a starting point. The real story, that's what you carve yourself. And carve he did. Even as a young dwarf, Gimli showed curiosity that went beyond gold and gems. He paid attention to songs, histories, legends. He asked questions. And that's important because wisdom isn't just inherited, it's gathered. Want to be sharp like Gimli? Start by knowing your roots, sure, but then go dig deeper. Read old stories, study the failures of your mentors, and never stop asking why things are the way they are. That's how a dwarf becomes more than just his beard and axe. But for all that strength and eagerness, fate didn't just roll out the red carpet. In fact, Gimli's first major test wasn't a glorious battle or heroic deed, it was rejection. And that sting, it would shape everything that came after. Imagine this. You've got fire in your heart, the blood of kings in your veins, and the chance to join a quest that could change history. But then, bam, you're told you're too young. That's exactly what happened to Gimli. At just 62 years old, he was eager to follow in his father Glóin's footsteps and join Thorin Oakenshield's quest to reclaim Erebor from Smaug. But in dwarven years, 62 is barely out of childhood. They benched him, plain and simple. And for a young dwarf full of ambition, that's not just frustrating, it's infuriating. You've got to understand, this wasn't just any adventure. This was the adventure, the one that would restore the lost dwarven kingdom under the mountain. And Gimli, He wasn't trying to prove himself for ego. He wanted to serve, to fight for something bigger than himself. But being turned away, it made him feel small, underestimated. And if you've ever been passed over for a promotion, overlooked, in a meeting or told not yet, when your soul screamed now, then you know exactly how he felt. But here's the twist. Sometimes being denied what you want becomes the fuel for becoming who you're meant to be. Gimli didn't sulk. He didn't rebel. He trained harder, studied more, and kept his ears open. He started listening to stories, with sharper ears and paying attention to what made heroes fall or rise. You want a lesson? Here's one. Rejection isn't the end. It's the invitation to level up. Let your no become your not yet. That's what Gimli did. He began sharpening more than just his axe. He sharpened his mind. He observed how his father and the others carried themselves before and after Erebor. He learned that battles don't begin on the battlefield. They start in the heart. This is something most people miss. They chase titles and milestones without laying the inner groundwork. Gimli was learning, quietly stacking up notches of wisdom for the day he'd get. His call, and trust me, it would come. So while he missed the first grand adventure, the fire didn't die out. It just burned deeper. And when the next great challenge came knocking, you can bet Gimli was more than ready to answer. In fact, it was a dark whisper from the east that finally pulled him into the center of Middle-earth's storm. Years passed, and Gimli finally laid eyes on the lonely mountain, Erebor, restored in all its glory. But by then, something had shifted in the air of Middle-earth. The mountain stood tall, yes, but the winds carried whispers, unsettling ones. Gimli had grown older, wiser, and more attuned to the undercurrents that shaped the world. And when a stranger came calling, tall, veiled in shadows, speaking in riddles, he wasn't fooled. Sauron was stirring, and this messenger wasn't just making conversation. He was hunting. The offer was chilling. News of Bilbo in exchange for one of the lost dwarven rings of power. Just imagine it, a servant of darkness knocking at your door with a serpent's smile and a deal laced in doom. Gimli didn't need to be a wizard to feel the weight of that moment. The message was clear. Evil doesn't always march in with drums. It creeps in with diplomacy. And in that instant, the stakes were no longer just about gold or glory. The shadow was stretching its fingers toward everything sacred. This encounter was more than just a political footnote. It cracked something open in Gimli. He realized that danger wasn't far off anymore. It was here. It was personal. And it wasn't just threatening kingdoms and crowns. It was targeting friends, stories, memories. That's when you start to see a shift in him. Not just a warrior in the making, but a guardian of Middle-earth's soul. He knew then this fight was going to touch everyone, dwarves, elves, men, hobbits, and no one would be allowed to sit it out. This is the kind of wake-up call we all face eventually. Maybe not from a ringwraith, but from a diagnosis, a betrayal, a moment when you realize the world's bigger and scarier than you thought. What do? You get clear. You find your ground. That's what Gimli did. He listened, he learned, and when Glóin reported it all at the Council of Elrond, it wasn't just news, it was a warning wrapped in courage. And behind that courage, a dwarf who was ready this time. And so, as the great powers of Middle-earth gathered in Rivendell, to forge a path through the darkness, Gimli stepped forward, not as Glóin's boy, but as a warrior in his own right. His next steps would take him into the very heart of danger, where an ancient alliance would begin to take shape. Picture the scene. Elves in shimmering robes, men with stormy pasts, a wizard with eyes like lightning, and in the middle of it, all a dwarf with fire in his gut. That was Gimli at the Council of Elrond. He wasn't just there as Glóin's son, he had a voice, and he used it. When Glóin revealed the visit from Sauron's messenger, it didn't just rattle the room, it forced everyone to realize just how far the shadow had reached. And suddenly, the dwarf who once sat out the quest of Erebor was front and center in the most important gathering of the age. But here's what made Gimli different. While others at the council debated and pointed fingers, he stood steady. He wasn't there for politics or glory. He was there because he understood the weight of what was coming. His voice cut through the noise with the kind of clarity only lived experience brings. You know, there's a power in showing up with calm resolve instead of ego. And Elrond saw that. That's why, when the time came to choose the 9 walkers, Gimli was chosen, not just as muscle, but as a mind and spirit capable of holding the line. Now, let's be honest. Putting a dwarf, an elf, a ranger, and 4 hobbits in the same group sounds more like a recipe for disaster than strategy. But that's exactly the beauty of Tolkien's world. The Fellowship wasn't built on sameness. It was built on tension, difference, and the choice to stand together anyway. Gimli represented more than just dwarves. He brought history, craftsmanship, and a deeply rooted sense of loyalty to the table. And that mix, that's what gave the Fellowship its strange but beautiful balance. The moment he was chosen, everything shifted for him. This wasn't just about protecting Frodo or destroying a ring. It was about defending what made Middle-earth worth saving, stone by stone, legend by legend. Think about your own Fellowship moments, those times when life calls you to step up, even when you're unsure if you belong. That's the lesson here. You don't wait to feel ready. You say yes, you show up, and you grow into the mission one step at a time. So with axe in hand and resolve in his heart, Gimli joined the Fellowship, and it wouldn't take long before his knowledge of stone, shadow, and ancestry would prove crucial, especially when the path led them into the deep, echoing dark of his people's ancient home. Crossing the misty mountains is no casual hike, even for a dwarf. But for Gimli, it was more than just another leg of the journey. Those mountains were sacred ground. They whispered stories of his ancestors, of triumph and tragedy, etched deep into the stone. And when the Fellowship's path turned toward Moria, Khazad-dûm, Gimli didn't just get excited. He lit up like a forge fire. Here was a chance to walk where Durin the Deathless once walked, to honor his lineage by setting foot in halls once carved by dwarven greatness. But oh, how the past can sting. Moria was no longer the glittering kingdom Gimli had hoped for. Instead of songs and stonework, there was silence and shadow. When he found Balin's tomb, grief didn't just hit him, it carved into him like a blade. That was his kin, that was his people. And in that chamber, surrounded by the remains of hope turned to ruin, Gimli didn't crumble. He stood guard, axe in hand, jaw tight. He defended Balin's memory and held the line against the goblins that swarmed in. That's loyalty not taught, but lived. Here's something that often gets missed. True courage isn't loud, it's consistent. Gimli didn't need grand speeches. He needed only his resolve. When they crossed the bridge of Khazad-dûm, it was Gimli's grounded presence that helped keep the Fellowship together as chaos erupted. The Balrog came, Gandalf fell. But still, Gimli moved forward. That's a real-world lesson for us all. When the mentor's gone, when the map burns, when fear surges, you keep going, you carry the torch. And in the darkest corners of Moria, his reverence for his heritage never cracked. That's rare. Most people, when their ideals are shattered, become bitter or blind. But Gimli? He mourned, but he didn't lose faith. He kept honoring the stone, the craft, the legacy. Even when the halls were filled with death, he found purpose. He reminds us that even in failure, there's beauty to be preserved, especially when history seems buried and forgotten. That's the soul of a true steward. Emerging from the mines, battle-worn and broken-hearted, the Fellowship carried more than just wounds. They carried stories. And for Gimli, the next step wasn't healing in solitude. It was reconnecting with the living and confronting centuries of dwarven suspicion head-on in the heart of elven land. After the chaos of Moria, most would want to flee, get far, away from the memories, the danger, the loss. But Gimli, he paused. Just outside the eastern gate, beneath the slopes of Celebdil, lies Mirror, a still lake wrapped in silence. And there he stopped to honor something sacred. This wasn't just a water break, this was a pilgrimage. Because deep in dwarven legend, that lake wasn't just beautiful, it was holy. It was where Durin the Deathless once looked into the water and saw a crown of stars upon his head. That vision became a prophecy, and Gimli, with reverence in his soul, sought it for himself. He didn't speak much in that moment, but you could feel the weight of it. As he gazed into the lake, he wasn't just seeing stars, he was seeing purpose, identity, belonging. Think of it like going to the grave of a great ancestor or visiting a childhood home that still echoes with laughter. There's a kind of quiet power in honoring where you come from, especially when the future feels uncertain. That reflection in Mirror reminded Gimli he was part of something vast, noble and unbroken, even if the world was falling apart around him. And here's the kicker, the others didn't fully understand, not Legolas, not Aragorn, not even Frodo. But Gimli didn't need their approval. He needed that moment for himself. That's something people forget in a hyper-connected world. Sometimes the most powerful moments are the private ones, the silent rituals you do alone, not for Instagram, not for applause. Whether it's journaling, lighting a candle, or revisiting a place that means everything to you, those small sacred pauses refill your spirit more than any victory. The dwarves weren't known for sentimentality, but Gimli, he had soul. That's why Mirror mattered. It wasn't about superstition, it was about anchoring himself. He'd just survived a place where death nearly claimed them all, where his people's legacy was desecrated. And yet the stars still reflected back. It was a sign. Hope lives, even when kingdoms fall. That stillness gave him strength. Not the kind you boast about, but the kind that helps you stay standing when the ground shakes. And so, carrying the memory of that reflection in his heart, Gimli marched on, into a forest where no dwarf dared tread for centuries. A land of elves, enchantment, and an encounter that would forever change his heart and reshape the future of interrace bonds in Middle-earth. Walking into Lothlorien was like stepping into the heart of a dream. Except for Gimli, it felt more like a test. Elves and dwarves didn't exactly have a cozy history. Old grudges ran deep, and mistrust was practically carved into both cultures. So when the Fellowship crossed into that golden wood, Gimli's guard was up. He expected cold stares, maybe even exile. What he didn't expect was her, Galadriel, radiant, ancient, unreadable, and in one gaze, she shattered every prejudice Gimli had ever carried. She didn't just tolerate him, she saw him. And more than that, she spoke to him in the old tongue of his people. Now that may not sound like much, but it was monumental. It was respect. Dwarves value few things more than being honored in their own language. And Galadriel, she took it a step further. She gave him a gift no elf had ever given, 3 strands of her hair. Let that sink in. Feanor, yes, the Feanor, once begged her for a single strand, and she refused him. But Gimli, she offered freely. That's not just a gesture, it's a legacy shift. Gimli wasn't the same after that. His view of elves softened, not because someone lectured him, but because someone loved him well. That's the secret, isn't it? Real transformation doesn't come from arguments, it comes from encounters. You can read 100 books about kindness, but one act of it cuts deeper than any theory. Galadriel didn't win Gimli over with logic. She did it with grace. And from that moment, something bloomed in him that had nothing to do with axes or armor. He carried those strands like a sacred treasure, not because of some romantic longing, but because they represented possibility. That even in a world torn by war, people could choose to change the story. That's a message worth remembering. Old wounds don't have to define the future. Just because mistrust was inherited doesn't mean it has to be passed on. Gimli embodied that truth. He broke the cycle. He let admiration grow where bitterness once lived, and out of that unlikely spark, right there in the heart of a forest he once feared, came a bond that would redefine Middle-earth's future. Because not long after, the dwarf who once muttered about elven trickery would find himself side by side with a certain archer, forging one of the most unexpected friendships in all of Tolkien's tale. At first, they could barely stand each other. Legolas, with his quiet elegance and thousand-yard elf stare, probably thought Gimli was all beard and bluster. And Gimli, well, he wasn't shy about throwing shade at elves, especially the ones who sang to trees and walked like the ground owed them something. But here's the beauty of it. Shared danger has a way of stripping away pride. When you're fighting side by side, dodging arrows and charging into the unknown, the labels start to fall off. That's exactly how the elf and the dwarf began to see each other, not just their races. It started subtly. A sarcastic comment here, a grudging nod there, but then came the battles, gritty, blood-soaked, desperate. And in those moments, they stopped competing and started connecting. You know how in life, the best friendships often start with rivalry. That's the kind of chemistry Gimli and Legolas had. Their bond wasn't born out of convenience. It was forged in fire, like the finest dwarven steel. And once it was set, nothing could break it. Not even centuries of ancestral beef. Their dynamic evolved into something beautiful. They pushed each other, teased each other, but most of all, they trusted each other. That's rare. In a world full of broken alliances and betrayals, their friendship was clean, simple, and strong. It reminds us that when you look beyond someone's surface, race, background, assumptions, you might just find a companion who changes the course of your journey. In fact, their bond became symbolic. Not just dwarf and elf, but division and unity walking hand in hand. And then came the kill count game. You remember Helm's Deep? While others screamed and scattered, Gimli and Legolas were counting bodies like it was a pub competition. 43, said Legolas. 42, grunted Gimli. It was hilarious, but also deeply telling. That playful rivalry wasn't just comic relief, it was a testament to how far they'd come. When the world burned, they found joy in the ashes. That's friendship at its finest, not escaping pain, but choosing. Laughter, anyway. And as the war deepened, so did their connection. Side by side, they fought in every major battle, their rhythm as natural as breath. And yet, it wasn't just about winning wars. Their friendship would shape decisions, shift destinies, and one day, even lead them beyond the shores of Middle-earth itself. If ever there was a night to test the courage of men and dwarves, it was the Battle of Helm's Deep. Rain poured, horns blared, and shadows swarmed by the thousands. And right there, atop those fortress walls, stood Gimli, shorter than most, but twice as fierce. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a spotlight, and Gimli didn't waste a second of it. From the moment he leapt into battle, his axe sang through the air with a rhythm born of fury, focus, and sheer dwarven pride. He wasn't just swinging steel, he was saving lives. At one critical moment, Eomer found himself overwhelmed, inches from being struck down. Guess who barreled in and cut through the chaos? Yep, Gimli. With a roar that echoed louder than the thunder, he cleared a path, dragging Eomer to safety. That wasn't strategy, it was instinct. That's what real warriors do. They protect, no matter the odds. And that scene alone, it's sealed. Gimli is more than comic relief. He was a pillar in the storm. Then came the glittering caves. While others saw a refuge or a tomb, Gimli saw a miracle. He didn't just admire them, he fell in love. The walls danced with light, and every crystal whispered the legacy of stone. It wasn't about gold or greed, it was reverence. Imagine walking into a hidden gallery of divine art no one else even noticed. That's how Gimli felt. And what did he do? He promised Legolas that one day he'd show him its beauty. That's a mark of true friendship, not just fighting together but sharing wonder. Now let's talk about that legendary kill count contest. As the battle raged, Gimli and Legolas kept tally, not out of arrogance but camaraderie. 42, Gimli shouted, bloodied and grinning. 43, replied Legolas, already knocking another arrow. You'd think they were playing chess, not fending off annihilation. But that's what made them unforgettable. Even in carnage, they found joy. That's a lesson most people miss. When the pressure's highest, sometimes what gets you through isn't brute force. It's having someone beside you who keeps you laughing. By dawn, the fortress still stood, and so did Gimli, bruised, battered, but unbowed. His valor at Helm's Deep wasn't just another notch in his belt. It was a declaration. Dwarves don't just endure, they inspire. And as dawn broke and the crows flew, new battles awaited. But first, there was a certain smooth-talking wizard who had one more trick up his sleeve. When the Fellowship rode to Isengard after the storm of Helm's Deep, they didn't find fire and fury. They found quiet and a soggy Saruman trapped in a tower. But don't let that calm fool you. There was still poison behind those words. Saruman, once the wisest of the Istari, still had a silver tongue and a snake's mind. One by one he tried to sway them. He spoke of reason, of alliances, of inevitability. And for a moment, the air felt heavy, almost seductive, almost convincing, but not to Gimli. Nope. The dwarf stood firm, arms crossed, gaze unblinking. Saruman's spell bounced off him like water on stone. That's the thing about dwarves. They're stubborn, yes, but they're also grounded. While others get lost in lofty ideals and sweetened lies, dwarves remember who they are. Gimli didn't need magic to see the truth. He'd walked through Moria. He'd fought for Helm's Deep. He'd watched Sauron's shadow creep across Middle-earth. No smooth voice was going to sell him peace with corruption. And when Saruman's honeyed words tried to slither into the cracks of the group's resolve, Gimli cut through the noise with blunt, dwarven honesty. "We don't need him," he muttered, gripping his axe. And he was right. Some situations don't need negotiation. They need clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a fall from grace. And Gimli, in that moment, represented the kind of wisdom that comes not from scrolls or spells, but from staying true when the world tries to twist you. That's resilience, plain and simple. And in real life, you need it more than ever. When someone in power tries to manipulate you, when they dress lies in charm, when fear is repackaged as reason, that's when you plant your feet. Like Gimli, you look through the mask, you remember your purpose, and you say no, not with anger, with certainty. That's the kind of inner armor no enemy can penetrate. As Orthanc crumbled behind them, and the Ents flooded Saruman's domain with justice, Gimli didn't celebrate. He simply moved on. There were greater battles to fight, and one of them would take him somewhere no dwarf in living memory had dared to walk. A path wrapped in shadow, bone, and ancient fear. You know fear. Real, gut-churning, soul-gripping. Fear? That's what the paths of the dead were. Most men wouldn't even whisper the name aloud. Yet there stood Gimli, at the entrance of that haunted tunnel, staring into the black maw of legend. And for a moment, just a moment, he hesitated. Not because he lacked courage, but because dwarves have a deep respect for the dead. They don't fear them out of superstition, but out of reverence. And this place, it reeked of unfinished oaths and ancient unrest. Still, he didn't turn back. Why? Because Aragorn was going, Legolas was going, and loyalty for Gimli always outweighed fear. That's a rare trait, even among heroes. It's easy to be brave when you're sure of the path, but Gimli chose to walk through his own terror step by step, because that's what the mission required. That's what friends required. And that right there is the kind of courage most overlook. Not the loud, sword-waving kind, but the quiet, sweaty-palmed kind that says, I'll go, even if everything in me wants to run. The deeper they went, the colder it got. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Shadows whispered, bones lay scattered, the air pressed against the lungs like guilt. And Gimli's axe hand twitched, not out of aggression, but from nerves. Yet still he pressed on. You see, bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let it steer. That's a lesson worth tucking into your pocket, because life will always present you with dark passages. What defines you is whether you go in anyway. By the time they emerged, the world outside had shifted. A storm was brewing, and they were bringing a hidden army with them. Ghosts bound by broken promises, summoned by a king returned. And Gimli? He didn't just survive that passage, he was transformed by it. He faced the unspeakable, walked through the heart of dread, and came out the other side not broken, but sharpened. That's growth, and once you've walked with ghosts, everyday fears lose their power. So, as the tide of war surged toward Gondor, and Minas Tirith cried out for aid, Gimli didn't hesitate anymore. He knew his place, his purpose, and his part in this final act. And when peace finally settled over Middle-earth, he didn't just vanish back into legend, he built something lasting. After the war, when the dust settled and the ring lay broken, many heroes faded into memory, but not Gimli. He wasn't the type to rest on old victories or bask in glory. No, he got to work. While others told stories, he picked up his tools. He became lord of the glittering caves, those very caves behind Helm's Deep that had once stolen his breath. And true to his word, he turned them into a dwarven marvel, crafting halls so radiant that even elves would stand in awe. That's vision, seeing possibility where others see stone. But that wasn't all. When the gates of Minas Tirith needed to be rebuilt, it wasn't men who reforged them. It was dwarves, led by Gimli himself. And he didn't bring just any metal, he brought mithril, that rare, near-magical ore that gleamed with the light of the stars. Mithril and steel, melded by hands that knew both battle and beauty. Think about that. The same dwarf who fought in the darkest places was now shaping symbols of peace. That's the kind of full-circle moment most people only dream of. What's more, he didn't just build with stone and metal. He preserved stories. His tales, insights, and records became part of the Red Book, the very chronicle that held Frodo and Sam's journey. And that detail? It matters, because history isn't just what happened, it's what gets remembered. And Gimli ensured that the dwarf voice, the dwarf heart wasn't lost in the elven and human retellings. That's how legacies endure, not by shouting the loudest, but by writing the truest. And let's not forget his leadership. Under Gimli, the glittering caves didn't just sparkle, they thrived. Trade routes opened, alliances strengthened, dwarves who once kept to themselves began to weave into the broader tapestry of Middle-earth. He proved that rebuilding wasn't just about stone, it was about bridges, between peoples, between past and future, between what was lost and what could still be created. Gimli didn't just survive the Third Age, he shaped the Fourth. But even the greatest builders eventually lay down their tools. And in his old age, Gimli felt a calling not of war or duty, but of friendship. A final journey awaited him, one no dwarf had ever taken. A choice that would defy tradition, history, and expectation. Years passed, and Middle-earth grew quieter. The fires of war had cooled, the kingdoms rebuilt. But for Gimli, something still stirred beneath the surface, an ache not of battle, but of belonging. He had built, led, and honored his ancestors. Yet his heart was tethered to something even stronger, friendship. And that bond, it called him west. Not to riches, not to thrones, but to the undying lands. A place where no dwarf had ever set foot, but where Legolas, his closest companion, would one day sail. You see, when Frodo and the elves prepared to depart, the world was shifting again. The time of men had come, and the elves were leaving the stage. Legolas, too, felt the pull, but he wouldn't go without the one friend who had stood beside him through every shadow, every skirmish, every joke shared beneath moonlight. So he built a ship of his own and invited Gimli. No decree, no precedent, no permission, just loyalty. That right there is the heart of Tolkien's Middle-earth. That love, real chosen love, transcends race, rule, and reason. It wasn't just a personal favor, it was historic. Gimli became the only dwarf ever allowed to sail west. That's not a minor footnote, it's a symbol of healing, of unity, of what's possible when hearts open instead of harden. Imagine what that voyage must have felt like. A dwarf raised on stone and silence, breathing in the air of the blessed realm. It wasn't his birthright, but it became his destination. Why? Because he earned it, not through status, but through soul. And that's the final lesson Gimli leaves us with. Your legacy isn't determined by where you start or what blood runs through your veins. It's forged in the fires of your choices. You can live your life bound by what your people have always done, or you can choose to write a new ending, one that carries not just your name, but the names of those you've walked with, fought with, and loved. Gimli didn't just live well, he ended well, and that's rare. So as the last ship disappeared over the horizon, carrying elf and dwarf alike into legend, a new tale began, one that whispered to all of Middle-earth, peace is possible, friendship is sacred, and no path, no matter how unlikely, is closed forever. And now that you've walked in Gimli's boots, through battle, loss, friendship, and legend, what will you do with it? Will you keep playing small, waiting for someone to hand you a title or permission slip? Or will you carve your worth like Gimli did, stone by stone, choice by choice? Because his story isn't just about dwarves and dragons. It's about you, about facing fear with laughter, about standing tall even when you're overlooked, and about choosing unity over pride, even when history says otherwise. What bridges could you build right now, across differences, across doubt, across time? What fears are you ready to face? Not because you're fearless, but because something greater is calling you forward. That's the real magic here. Gimli shows us that legacy doesn't come from where you're born. It comes from what you're willing to become. So if this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for more tales of Middle-earth that inspire you to live boldly, love fiercely, and leave something worth remembering.